3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the theme in terms of geopolitics coming into the next decade is uncertainty, volatility, and geopolitical conflict. That is to say, especially with tensions in the EU as a whole or the European continent as a whole, given escalating border conflict and skirmishes, potential stagnation or even escalation of the Russia-Ukraine war, and the war of attrition we're seeing in those particular areas, as well as increased interest of US protectionism, case in point stifling USAID across the world, and even China continuing to be China, trying to take more than that they can give. Externally, as an actor or as a third-party observer looking at this, it's high time for a more solidified European continent. That is to say, we want a particular strong emphasis on being able to bolster the optics of the entire continent in order to be able to militarily, economically, politically, and socially deal with a lot of these potential escalation. But I'll talk about the elephant in the room. Despite Brexit happening in 2020, the European Union regrets this. And the UK, they tried to pull off a Switzerland, they tried to be neutral and all grown up in the name of autonomy, but things change given a few things that happened over the past few years. The COVID pandemic had shaken the world in how we look at these defined borders. It has weakened the pound amidst a strengthening euro, and the theme of geopolitical conflict and tension is hotter for that particular continent. A few features of our model which we think are relevant for this debate. Number one, this debate is about prioritizing what approach and strategy to do in terms of scarcity of time, resources, and capacity. That is to say, on-side proposition, we think it's geographically proximate to be able to strengthen and bolster ties with the EU in terms of those things. And on-side opposition, talking about externalities, I'm not sure who that would be. I hope they can tell us later in a point of information. Number two, what does prioritize rebuilding relations with the UK particularly look like? Make no mistake, this isn't a super hardline debate about them joining the EU again and undoing Brexit. This debate is specifically a strategy of solidarity in order to be able to bolster the continent as a whole. That is to say, we think it's quite in the interest of all of these particular parties to have that kind of link in terms of proximity, in as much as the UK wanted to be impartial, they wanted to be independent. If they don't want to get wrecked by Russia, China, and the United States, this is something strategic for them to do. Let's take a look at the US, why they might be a bad partner, especially because of the reciprocal tariffs. Even neutral states trying to have those kinds of protection still face the backlash of this given the motivation of Donald Trump with MAGA Season 2. That is to say, it becomes literally quite expensive, especially in terms of rising cost of shipping and a lot of these routes essentially being politicized through reciprocal tariffs, making it difficult for them to get access to basic commodities and resources. Let's talk about China. The long-term CCP interest is alive and well, meaning the proliferation of predatory lending, the proliferation of them being kind of sketchy, sending drones and balloons and spies and trying to, as I said in my pre-oration, take more from you than they can give. And Russia, in as much as escalation can happen or stagnation of the conflict, is largely a hostile and volatile actor, of which, if anything escalates in the area, is literally within striking range of the UK that could potentially affect them militarily, politically, and economically. So what does strengthening ties look like and why is this good? This looks like, and is including but not limited to, A, strengthening existing bilateral agreements, things like joint military exercises, mutually beneficial trade agreements in order to make sure that the rising cost of commodities amidst the back of weakening currencies against the dollar and other related baskets of currencies allow you to still trade the shit to be able to get the things you need, and ultimately a show of soft and hard power in order to be able to bolster the continent interest as a whole. B, all of this like drama with Brexit in the past, yes, that's a cultural and social factor. But like I mentioned, these heads of government, the people living there, they're rational. They wanted to do it before. Things have changed. Things are not likely to look well into the future. So a lot of these things, in as much as it could be the elephant in the room, these particular things and the perspectives of such can also change. Like I mentioned also in the top of my speech, to a large extent, the EU regrets this because they lost a huge chunk of what contributed to them. And the UK, both as a government and as the individual people, are also quite worried. In as much as when the economy was good and things were fine, they tried to be able to be independent and do these things themselves. But economic and political contagion that can happen when Daddy America and Mommy China are going to conflict, and you have a lot of these other actors like Russia, etc., are creating a lot of hostility and adversarial nature in terms of the continent. That is to say, from the lens of a neutral observer, we think that for the UK, for the EU, and for the rest of the world, this is good. What are the impacts to our case that I've forwarded? Number one, it solidifies Europe politically, economically, socially, and militarily. Politically, because now it allows them to be able to make certain decisions at a faster kind of pace, and it shows their politicians and the people who voted for them that they aren't just latching on biases in the past and they can make forward-thinking decisions in the future. Economically, it allows them to hedge any risk with the dollar when they're able to have some sort of arbitrage from the pound and also from the euro. That is to say, it's not concentrated on either, and when they're able to have swaps in terms of currency, imports and exports can potentially become cheaper or at least offset those risks. Socially, it shows people that we aren't alone, especially in terms of UK. Because while the EU and that side of Europe is bolstering militarily, they don't want to be left in the dust. They don't want to be ignored. They don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. Militarily, this is important. This is important because it shows these other world powers that both the EU and the UK is a force to be taken seriously, and all of these things can contribute to the hard and soft power that can change how we look at Europe. For all of these reasons, we are very proud to stand and open this debate from side proposition.